Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. Thank you very much for taking the time to join Digistore and VidCheck this morning. My name is Matt Wood, and I'm one of the sales guys at Digistore. I've included my contact details on the slide here, and I would welcome questions at any time regarding pricing, quotes, configurations, or anything else. I've also included our Facebook and Twitter account details. Following Digistore is a great way to keep up to date with events, specials, technology developments, and much more. All attendee microphones are muted to avoid background noise. So if you have any questions, please type them in the questions window and we'll see if we can answer them during the presentation. They will be logged, so we will make sure we respond to each and every question, even if it is after the event. The webinar is also being recorded, so if all goes to plan, we'll send you a YouTube link and a follow-up email so you can watch the presentation at your convenience. For those that are not familiar with Digistore, our company is a leading solutions supplier across a range of digital production areas. This slide shows some of the areas we address, so talk to us about any requirements you may have. We supply integrated solutions incorporating the world's leading brands and work closely with manufacturers to ensure optimal results. We work with mixed Mac and PC environments across products such as Autodesk, Avid, Apple, Adobe platforms, across an office or across the world. So why Digistore? We have a sales and technical support staff in Brisbane, Sydney and Melbourne. We have created Digistore customer assurance plans, ensuring priority access to the support team via phone and email, unlimited remote support via VPN, and also regular scheduled health checks and extended business hours support. We can also do classroom style training, as well as the ability to send trainers on site for more customized workshops. I'm now going to hand over to Thomas from VidCheck. He's the CEO and co-founder. He's based in the UK, so please bear with us while we bring him up.
Good morning to you all. It's good evening here, but good morning to you. So I'll run through things fairly quickly because there's an awful lot to the VidChecker software, and so I'll only be able to touch on things briefly. I'll also give a bit of an introduction to file-based media. First, about our company. I hope you can see my screen okay.
Yes, we can.
Okay, so we're in Bristol in the UK, so some distance from you guys. But we've been doing file-based QC software for quite some time. We did the Serify product, if you know of that, until Electronics closed the office in the UK. And we set up again doing the version 2, the second generation product, shall we say. And it's for automated quality control for file-based media in particular. And it's for broadcasters, post-production, cable, media distributors, as it says there. We have a number of products. I'll come back to that, and I'll focus particularly on VidChecker, as that gives a pretty good introduction. But we have other products there as well. So, looking at some of the sort of educational aspects, file-based media, I'm sure some of you know this, but some of you may not. We have a much longer presentation which we can provide on this, but to give you some idea and the differences with having tapes, for example, or having live SDI streams and so on. A file is a file on a disk, like any other file, like a Word file or whatever, but there are particular aspects to the file and parts of the file. So, for example, if you have an MXF file or an MOV file, you have a few parts to that. You have the file wrapper, which links everything together. Then typically you would have a big chunk of data in that, which is the compressed video, which might be MPEG-2 or H.264, ProRes, DNX. You'll have a chunk of audio data, which is smaller, and a chunk of metadata, so maybe closed captions or copyright information and so on. So that's sort of a schematic view, but how the data is stored on the disk, and this is maybe relevant when you talk about decoding and checking things. If you look at the first frame, is the top half of this slide there, So you have the overall file data that says this is file name such and such, and it's got video and audio in it. And typically you have a chunk of metadata and then information on the first video frame, then a chunk of the green data is the first bit of audio that goes with the first video frame. And the lower half of this slide is showing how you have multiple video frames, or one after the other, typically interspersed like that with the video data and audio data and metadata for the frames interspersed throughout the file, and you occasionally have extra wrapper data and more data put at frame intervals. So some of you may know of the GOP, or group of pictures, that you have in MPEG-2, say a 15 frames or 12 frame GOP you might have, so in which case you'd have a group of pictures that could stand alone, as it were. There's lots of detail here. For example, often the order the frame data is stored on the disk or stored is different to how it's presented. So there isn't a typo where it says frame 1, frame 4, frame 2, frame 3, frame 7. That's how the data is stored, because that's how it needs to be stored to be decompressed using a decoder. So some of the formats that you'll come across with compressed files, so common file wrappers, MPEG-2 transport streams, program streams, MXF, MOVs, AVIs, MP4s, and within the file wrappers, common video codecs would be MPEG-2, of course, H.264, which can go by various names, ABC, MPEG-4, then you'd have IMX, XDCAM, ProRes, DNX, see the list there, and common audio codecs you'd have of WAVs and PCMs and AACs. One issue there, of course, is if you multiply the number of file wrappers by the number of video codecs by the number of audio codecs, there are an awful lot of variations you can get, and you do actually get as well, and that's one of the issues with making sure that when you're receiving the file, do you have that combination of file wrapper, video and audio that you want to have? Is it what you're expecting to have, and is it what you need to have to do the processing you're doing? Another thing that takes a bit of getting around is a file is just a file. You can copy, move, delete it like any other file. When you're dealing with real-time video, like on SDI, you maybe have a vertical blanking interval, or if you go back to even analog days, you've got the VBI data, and if you have an old SDI tape, you'll have the little black and white dots at the top, which are maybe the captions. And you'll have signal timing there, and you'll have a 1 volt peak to peak, and IREs and so on. You just don't have any of that with the video file. You've got data on a disk, it's ones and zeros. So you don't have voltage levels, you don't have IREs, you don't have a vertical blanking interval. Now you may have vertical blanking data stored as a data track, going back to that diagram I had with the metadata. That may be the metadata that's stored going with each frame, but it's actual separate data. It's not part of the picture, should we say. A key point there is the only way to know what is in the file is actually to have something that decodes the file. Now, you can play the file out and look at it and see it on screen, or you can use, as we recommend, QC software to check things there, to make sure that you can read the wrappers and the headers and decode the video and decode the audio and read the metadata. Quick summary on the VidChecker product there. It's a Windows software application, and we recommend server versions, or you can run it on desktop. There's two halves to it, and I'll show you that. There's the VidChecker server, which does the processing, and then there's the web-based user interface, and I'll show you the user interface. Important point about that is you can use any machine. So if you have a Mac, and you can dial in from Safari over your network to the VidChecker server. Though the VidChecker server is running on Windows, you can perfectly well control it and run it from a Mac without any problem. Now it is, as I say, just for files there, but not just for quality control, but also correction, automatically correcting a number of the most common faults. And it is for broadcasters who are receiving files, for example, and want to check on ingest, for post-production companies who want to check a completed file before it is sent out, perhaps for distributors of commercials or music videos or other media, satellite and cable operators, and for archive as well. So what does it check? Well, the basic file parameters, so things like bit rates, frame size, aspect ratios, play times, captions present, and so on. Checks the video, make sure that you've got the right range for the lumen chroma, that you have black frames where they should be and not where they shouldn't be, that you have color bars where they should be. Check the audio, so audio loudness is quite a big issue in a number of parts of the world. And for example, if you're delivering to the US, that's a requirement to meet the CALM Act. So it does all those things, and a lot of detail there. But not only does the checking, but does it intelligently corrects those as well. So for example, if you need to meet the US CALM legislation, VidChecker can correct that for you. Or if you have the need to meet the European requirements, which are slight variations on that in levels, and you can do that with VidChecker as well. And also check for correct for things such as black levels and chroma and RGB gamut and so on. Used by quite a few folks, just some of the customer names, some you recognize, I would hope there. So NBC, Sony, Fox, I won't go through all the list, but quite a good list of customers there, as well as folks in the UK like the BBC and ITV and so on. And now a few customers in Australia, I'm very pleased to say. So a bit up on workflow and integration. This is a bit of a complex picture, but gives you an idea with the broadcast of how you might typically use VidChecker, where you might use that. So the files would come into on the left-hand side there and go into a watch folder, and when they arrive, very typically VidChecker would just recognize that the file has arrived and will pick it up and start checking it. Or you'd take files off tape or out of archive and you do an ingest check effectively. So this is often referred to as a mezzanine file or a master file that's used for generating other files. And then when it's been checked and corrected, it's passed on to transcode, and maybe lots of different versions produced. So from the master file, which might be an HD, or if it's older, an SD, you might produce an HD, SD, an iPad version, an iPhone version, Android version, and you'd encode it in MPEG-2 and H.264 and so on. And then typically after transcode, you would also check the transcodes, because errors can occur in the encoding or the wrong things selected is quite a common aspect. And then the file will go out. So this is a much more complex picture than just a few years ago, where one was only transmitting SD, for example. It's a lot more content to deal with, basically, a lot higher volume to deal with, typically. And you may have an overall asset management system controlling all these stages of the process. If you're looking at content distribution or post-production, or either case, so you produce a file and maybe produce different versions, and whoever you're delivering the content to will have a specification of how they want that content to be, a technical specification, saying, oh, it must be this resolution, this frame rate, and this bit rate, and so on, this codecs. And then VidChecker is used for checking to make sure it meets that requirement, and then typically passed to a watch folder, and then out it goes and to the person you're delivering it to. So how to integrate VidChecker? I mean, watch folder I mentioned a few times. That's a very, very quick and easy thing to do. It's literally minutes to set up. VidChecker automatically picks up, detects arrival of the files, and does the testing, moves the files as well. So it does part of the workflow there for you, in fact. It's also directly integrated in quite a few third-party systems. We're adding to the list pretty frequently. So like Amplifin, Telestream, Sperry, you see the list there. We do have an up-to-date list on a website, and friends at Digistor can give you that information as well. But it means that you can call VidChecker directly from within those third-party applications as part of the workflow, if you want to do it all from that UI with third-party application as well. And you can use it, VidChecker in a Mac environment. It does run fine on a Mac under Parallels or VMware. You can use it on Amazon Web Services as well. Clearly, the QC task is reasonably processor intensive, and even if you do have a Mac environment, you generally want to dedicate a computer, so it doesn't really make much difference, I would suggest, whether you have a Windows machine dedicated to doing the QC task or a Mac machine, it all links together and it works in a pretty seamless way. And as I've said, because the user interface uses a browser, there's no problem with accessing and controlling it from Macs as well, actually, even though it's a Windows application. So a simple explanation of when it does the QC. So the files come in, VidChecker will check them, and if it's good, move it onto the pass folder, which might be an input to the transcoder, and if it's bad, move to a reject folder, and then it can automatically send an email or produce a report to say what's wrong with it, and then someone can go and have a look and say whether it's really is good or bad. So the products we have the VidChecker product, which does the QC and correction and processes 4 files at a time. That's when you have quite a good volume of content to process. We also have a product called VidChecker Post, which, as the name suggests, is for post houses. It does all the same checks as VidChecker, but it just does 1 file at a time, and it's half the price. So it's a lower cost option, but it does the comprehensive checks you need to do. And we have a new product called VidFixer, which does everything in VidChecker plus lots of extra fixing, and will do a transcode as well all in one pass if you want to do that. So this is a much more complex sort of workflow you can set up with VidChecker. We have customers actually doing this, where it checks the files come in and says, is it a transport stream? If it is, pass it off to the right. If it's not, check if it's an MOV, is it an MXF, and then do different bits of checking. This is all achieved with just a single instance of VidChecker that is looking at all these different watch folders and doing all the file movements and so on. And if you have the same volume in Windows, you're moving file pointers here, not moving files, so the movements are actually very quick. File movements very quick. So I'll move on and show you VidChecker briefly as well. Just switch. So actually, I'll show you that first of all. That black box, which I hope you can see, is the VidChecker server. Now, as it happens, I'm running it on my laptop here, but normally you'd have that running on a server in a server room. Then that's controlled from the. I realize I'll just reopen the user interface. Alright, there we go. So hopefully you should see a browser screen there now, which is the VidChecker user interface. So I'll just pick out some of these things to run through. Now the idea is this is your dashboard, your record of tests that you've done essentially. And you can see fairly straightforwardly just a poster frame for the file name, some basic information like the file size. The next column here is key, it's a template. And the template is the list of tests that you've done on that file. Now, a thing to bear in mind is you will have different templates for different files. So, for example, you'll have a different template for standard definition versus high definition. You have a different template for MPEG-2 and H.264, and for XDCAM and IMX and so on. And you'll have different templates for a number of different reasons. So, for example, you want to check you have the right audio if you're trying to receive or sending out stereo. You have a different template if you're trying to check that it is 5.1 in there, for example. So that's quite key, that you'll have a number of templates, and there's no restriction. We provide examples of templates, which I'll show to you. The next column is the type of task, and you can see a little man task there, a little man icon, should we say. And I've also left the mouse still, and hopefully you can see a little tooltip has popped up that says started manually, so that task would run manually. If I scroll down the list here, yeah, here we go. There's a couple of folder icons there, which you see means that they are watch folder tasks, which means they're started automatically, no manual intervention required at all. So you can run tasks manually, or you can run tasks with watch folders. The third way, if you're controlling it from a third-party application like a Telestream or a Spira, you'd see a machine cog there to indicate it's controlled by another machine now. Then it shows the start and end time of the task, the processing, the testing. Then you have two columns, status and corrected. The status is a result of the testing that's been done, and the corrected is whether we've corrected the problems. Now, if you see there, the orange or amber with the exclamation mark indicates you've got a warning problem there, and the green tick on the right indicates we've corrected that particular problem. If we scroll down, you can get a green tick if the file is fine, or you can get a red, which means a reject, a more severe error was in the file there. And you can do things with this page of sorting it and showing various tasks with various status and all this sort of thing. You can do straightforwardly, and I won't go into all that. But to see the detail of what's happened there, if I click on this, click on first task and go into that, what it shows is details on the particular file. So the input file was this one, chrysler.mpg. So it says it's an MPEG program stream, MPEG 2 in it, and it's 72480, 2997 frames a second. And then it shows in the alerts at time code, as it shows 0029 seconds 28 frames, from that time code to 1 minute 50 seconds 14 frames, the chroma levels were out of spec, and it gives information right there. But one of the points is for operators, we try and make a fairly straightforward bit of information. So on the left it shows that the error is a chroma level error basically, and these are the time codes. If you hold the mouse still, it gives you a zoomed up picture, and in fact if you click on that, it opens up a player at the time code where the error is, and you can then play through that. Hope you can see that, and maybe hear that. So the idea is you can have a quick idea of what the problem is and get an idea of it. And what you can do also is say, actually, those chroma levels aren't a problem really. What I can do is I can change them from a warning, I'll change it to a pass level. Now, in fact, because this is the full version I have here, it's going to tell me that I need to be logged in as an admin. So I'm going to click on that. I've got to log in as admin. You can maybe just about see top right, it says logged in as viewer. In the demo versions you would try about, so the admin, the first levels are not enabled, but when you have the full version, you have admin, operator, and viewer. So now I've changed that, and you see the status has changed from warning to pass, as it says. So it's got the green pass now, but behind it, it also keeps the orange that shows that originally it was a warning, and someone's changed it to a pass, and then you can go back and have a look, and you look at the audit trail. So user Tom has said it's okay and changed the status from warning to pass, and when that was done. So that audit trail is kept in the database, so you can see if whichever operator has changed something, why they've changed it, what they've changed, and so on. And you can change it back again if you have the right privileges as well. So there are quite a few different things you can check out. The next one I'll pick is on loudness, for example. And this is going through measuring the peak audio levels at various times through the file and putting up some waveforms and measuring the loudness, and again correcting these as well and producing a corrected file, give the corrected file name. Actually, this was a program stream as well, or an example of a different file. So this is a different sort of error. This is a check with the blockiness. So this is a particular file with lots of errors in there, blockiness errors between different time codes, short bursts of blockiness. I'm not sure how well this is going to come out on the link to you guys, but yeah, there's some. I picked one of the frames with the worst bits of blockiness. You probably can't see by the guy's foot and arm and by the bat. There's a reasonable amount of blockiness there, and that's what it's picked up as a problem. One thing with VidChecker there, I mean, at the moment we've got it set to show all the errors individually, or show a certain number of errors. In fact, what it said is, show me the first 20 errors individually, and so we showed the first 20 blockiness errors, but then it says this alert type occurred another 30 times, a further 30 times in the file in this in the time codes given. So what this means is you can set a limit and say only show me the first 10, 20, however many you want, a particular error alert. Otherwise you could get, if you had the same error occurring hundreds of times in the file, you get a report that was way too long and hard to interpret. You can get all the details if you want to have all the details there. So that's a very quick idea of the sorts of things we might pick out. I'll move on to the configuration shortly. Another thing you can do is say, okay, how do I begin? Well, there's an easy way to begin, shall we say, which is to use the auto template feature, as we call it. So this file we've tested and we said it's perfectly good, it's passed, no alerts. This is DV and MOV. And what we can do is we can generate an auto template from that, and okay, we'll give it a name, Digistor maybe DV. Okay, and then that will generate a template, and we'll go and look at that template now. So if we look at the templates, this, to remind you, is the configuration of the tests and so on. So I'll come back and in this there. So Digistor MOV DV is what we just generated. And what this has done is within the various groups of the template, it's turned on a bunch of the tests, taken a known good file and said, okay, I know this file should have this configuration. You can use that as a starting point. So within the template setup, you have 4 main test groups there, 4 main groups plus the notes. So the file details is checking the file wrapper. So do you have, if you want to have an MOV, is it an MOV? If you want to have DB25 in there, does it have DB25 in there? And then check the frame size is correct, and chroma sampling and so on. So it turns on a bunch of the tests there, but there are a whole lot of additional tests you can turn on as well. I won't go through them all because it would take far too long. But if you want to know the details of any of the tests, what you can do is on the top right here, there's a little help text, and it's always available. You just click on the help, and it brings up the help. It's reasonably context sensitive in that we're looking at the templates, so it says, so it goes to the template section, we look at the file details there, and then it says what all the tests do. So if we come down and look at these, it says, explains what all the tests do, and it's quite legible. It's not too wordy, so if you have a question, recommend that what a test does, have a look at that there. When you've turned a test on, by default it is a warning, and if you click that, then it becomes a reject, and that makes a difference to whether it's a warning or reject. And as you see, when we've changed something here, we've got a little star and a little asterisk, like in a sort of Word document, to indicate something's changed there, and then the save button becomes active there. But there are a lot of tests you can have turned on there, bit rates and GOP lengths, and more detailed GOP lengths checks, and teletext and captions, and all sorts of things you can have there, which I'll just skip over fairly briefly because time's fairly short. Time codes and so on, time code continuity. But all these are sort of header checks or basic file checks that you're doing there. Excuse me. And look at metadata. Now beyond that, the video checks are looking at the actual video and decoding the actual video. So checking that if you have a track ID, for example, which you might have in an MPEG transport stream, you have the right track ID. Checking for letterboxing or pillar boxing, and chroma levels, black levels, and gamut. Check for the presence of bars, for example. So something you can do is say, okay, I want to have color bars at the start, and they should start at the very beginning, so time 0, and they should stop at 5 seconds. And you can put in decimals there as well to do that, and do it on frames and so on if you want to. And then say not present at any other time you can do. And you might say that we've got bars the first 5 seconds, and I want to have black frames starting at 5 and stopping at 15, for example. You can do that. But not anywhere else. So you can set up a layout, as we call it, of the file if you wish to do that, and check for these things. Beyond that, there's much more detailed checks on things such as looking for freeze frames, looking at the quality, the blockiness, which is that American football, baseball example I showed a bit earlier. Then things like looking for field order, and this is not just checking that if the file says it's top field first, which for example if it's HD and interlaced it will say that, but to actually check that the baseband video, the real video, is top field first. In this case, because it's DB, it's bottom field first, and this checks that the baseband video will play correctly, which means that if it's bottom field first or progressive, it will play correctly. Other things are checking cadence and checking for dropouts, so picture errors and digital dropouts, analog dropouts from analog tape, or corrupt frames you might have, and then looking for flashing, which is a photosensitive epilepsy checking requirement for the UK and Japan. So if you're delivering content UK or Japan, you need to have that test done. And our testing there is approved by the BBC for the meet UK legal requirements. But all these tests are decoding the actual video and checking the video itself, the video data itself is correct. When it comes on to audio, it's a similar sort of thing. We decode the audio and check the audio is correct. So some of these things are filled in already because that was the default template, or sorry, the auto template we generated from the known good material, and it's got 2 channels. And you can check for phase coherence, stereo check, test tones present or not present, and clipping, clicks and pops. But then also check for levels, peak level, loudness, and so on, as you might be legally required to do. Now, you'll see that there's 8 channels selected. Now, the way VidChecker works, you can have as many audio tracks as you want, and within it, a track, we say, is mono, stereo, 5.1 or 7.1. So if you've got that first track is stereo pair, which is 2 channels, stereo pair, and we're checking the loudness of the stereo pair, what you can do is either add track, if you just want to start afresh, or clone track. So now we have a second audio track, also with stereo in that, which you can use. So that particular media we're now saying has 2 audio tracks that we're checking, each stereo pair. Now what you sometimes get, is not unusual now, is perhaps to have 8 mono tracks, for example, but the 8 mono tracks are really a stereo pair followed by a 5.1. And how we deal with that is we do what we call channel mapping. So input track 1, channel number 1, input track 2, channel number 1. So it treats the first 2 mono tracks, in this case as a stereo, maps it that way. And then for the second audio track, we also do the channel mapping. But supposing instead of this being a 2 channel, it was a 6 channel there, so it was a 5.1, we'd have the 3rd mono track, the 4th mono track, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th. And so you've got your first 2 mono tracks make the stereo there in track 1, the next 6 mono tracks make the 5.1 here, and then you would do the checks across the 5.1, and you do the peak level checks across the 5.1, for example. In fact, you do the first 5 rather than the LFE track as well. And you can keep adding as many audio tracks as you want. So, for example, we've got a customer in the UK who has 24 stereo audio tracks, because they distribute their commercials around Europe in 24 different languages. So that's not an uncommon use of that. Within the general settings of things such as setting processing priorities, folders that things are moved to, how the processing is done, whether you check, in this case, I mean, we had the first 20 blockiness errors showing, and you can set that how many you want. Or you can say, I'll stop processing if there's any reject alerts. I mean, if you have a half-hour program, there's no point, if you've got a reject right at the beginning, there's no point going through the whole half-hour movie and processing the whole of it. Or if you have, say, I don't know, 100 warning alerts, then the chances are there's something wrong with the encode, or you've got the wrong template with the wrong file. There's no point continuing after that, so you can set it to stop processing at that point as well. Other things you can do are things such as generate a report automatically. So you can say automatically on when I've got errors or corrections or on all of them, you can say I'll generate a report and send it to a particular folder, and I'll email it as well, and you can determine where they go, and you can configure those reports as well. So for example, a report that you might get, if you look at the results screen here, now it's just giving me a warning with these little asterisks that I haven't saved the changes. I won't bother saving the changes there. Okay, yeah. So what I can do is if I find something with an error in here, so let's see, pick this particular one, which has got errors in, and I can generate a report from that. I'll come back and show you something interesting on here which VidCheck has picked out as well. Actually, do that first of all while I think of it. In fact, this is looking for dropouts, which and this is just something I'll mention. I'll just step through to find the frame of dropouts. I don't know if you can see that. There's a little dropout here on the door. There's a green dropout here on the door. There's a little white one here on the bonnet. There's a blue one here. And there's a green one here on the front of the car as well. So there's a few digital dropouts which VidCheck can pick out automatically and do a pretty good job on. It's not perfect, but it's pretty good. And it will find these sorts of glitches as well. That's an example of the analog dropouts, digital dropouts test turned on there. But to generate a report, coming back to that, I'll generate a PDF report, and XML reports are often used for machine readable applications, should we say, and we'll output it to a folder, and let's see, click OK, and then just generates a PDF report. So it's told me where my report is there, so I'm going to go and find that report. Second. Reports. So is that the one I just did? Let's see. No, my apologies. I didn't notice where I put the report. Let's do that again. Okay. Oh, okay. Right. Okay. I was looking in the wrong place. My apologies. Normally, you'd have that set up as a standard folder, of course, and you can determine that, set that up in the admin page there. So this is the report I just generated there, and this is a PDF report. And as you can see, it's got the file details, it's got the file name, and then it's got the same information on the dropouts, the thumbnails, and then the templates used and the tests that were turned on to do that. Now, the reason I'm showing that is to make the point that you can configure those reports how you want to have them. So there's a style sheet, like a CSS style sheet that you have with any web page, which determines not only the colors and you can determine the layout, but also the content that appears there. So, for example, if you want a report to go to an operator who is maybe doesn't have a lot of technical detail, maybe wouldn't bother with the file details things. You just have the title at the top, and then you'd have these things with the time codes, the thumbnails, say these are the problems, and just the person would have to go back and re-edit and correct the problem. Or for someone in engineering, you'd have all the information in there, and that's all determined by a style sheet. You can configure that as you want and put your own logos in and colors in and so on. So if you're bouncing a report back, a pass or fail report back to a content supplier, you can configure that with your own logos and everything you might want to have there. Okay, so that's a very quick run through on those. This is a list of the templates I've got on this machine, and all the templates with a little dash in front of them are default templates we provide and default examples. And if you have a trial of VidChecker, one thing we'd recommend is you don't want to turn everything on at once. I mean, if you were looking, you see there's quite a few tests you could turn on and check here, and it's important to start off with a few at a time and then understand what they do, and then gradually turn on more and more, picking out the particular issues that you want to have a look at there. In fact, one thing I'll mention, it's new in this version as well, is Netflix templates. We have some things that are specific to iTunes, so I'll just jump back to guess a ProRes will do here. So some things that are specific to iTunes, clean aperture and iTunes compatibility tests that we put in for various folks like Sony and for iTunes, for Apple themselves there. And then also a new thing is a bunch of Netflix templates if you're delivering to Netflix. Now, we picked the 5 most common Netflix templates. Well, they suggested these to put in there, and it's got these configurations, but there's a whole bunch of additional templates we provide, which you can optionally load up and import and so on, how things need to be set up if you're delivering to Netflix there. And you can set up your own templates for delivering to other folks as well, and we can help you with that. But see, there's a reasonable list, and you can add to them very straightforwardly and have as many as you want. We have customers with literally hundreds of different templates, and it isn't actually that bad to set up. You saw how quick an auto template is to do, and then you can take a template and use the copy function to replicate that, and you can apply different templates to different watch folders, and you have hundreds of watch folders running at the same time to do that. So that's a very quick run through, just sort of a touching of the surface there of VidChecker. I'll just jump back to the presentation, just go through a few more points, leaving some time for questions at the end there as well. So things to bear in mind when you're using and implementing automated QC. I mentioned this already there about some dedicated tests we have for iTunes and Netflix, and we're speaking to various other folks as well. But if you want us to one particular test there, it's very easy to come up with a configuration that matches the delivery specification that you got there as well. The thing to bear in mind is moving from tape to file-based. You're dealing with video and media, but it's an IT issue. So bearing that in mind, if you've got lots of video to check, you've got to allow time to process that. Now, VidChecker is really rather good in that regard, in that it does process multiple files concurrently. It will use all the cores that you have available, and increasingly, of course, multiple core machines are getting cheaper, so you can throw processing power at the problem, and that's becoming relatively inexpensive to do. And if you're processing multiple audio, you don't want to have to repeat for each stream. We don't with VidChecker. We process all the audio concurrently. But other things to bear in mind is if you're moving large files around your internal network, how much time does it take? How much space do you need to store those files as well? And if you're using video servers, like you're using Omnium real-time playout server, maybe it's not doing the network I/O quickly. And so you need to bear that in mind. You might need to even do an upgrade there on the I/O so you're not getting a bottleneck on the network. And some IT and training and understanding is required for the staff there, or might be required anyway, actually. So I'll just step back to this slide a second. Another point to bear in mind is to make sure you don't have bottlenecks there. I mean, it's the same sort of thing about an IT issue, in that you may have this super duper 24-core machine, and then you're trying to put 8 220 megabit ProRes HQ files to that and write them in and read them out using VidChecker, but you have a 1 gigabit network. Well, that isn't going to work. The network will be the bottleneck there. Or if you have a local hard disk and you're trying to write to the local hard disk, which is a normal sort of 7200 RPM hard disk, maybe that'll be the bottleneck. So you need to size the processors with the network, with the disk access, to all match in a reasonable way. Next thing to bear in mind is AutoQC is not a person. I guess it's an obvious point, but it's very good at some things. So technical checks, excellent for doing that. So we want to make sure it's the right frame rate, looking for blocks, looking for legality and so on, and doing things accurately and consistently and so on, and doing it throughout the whole file. You're not doing just the beginning, middle, end there. You're doing the whole file all the way through. Because with file-based, the beginning, middle, end just doesn't work. I mean, often when things are set up in the sort of SDI domain, if things are running smoothly, they keep running smoothly. But you can get a digital glitch in a frame that causes ripples through a few frames, and that might be 90% of the way through. So unless you're checking the whole file, you won't get a good result. So AutoQC is really great for technical issues, but the thing to bear in mind is it's not good for interpretation. So, for example, I'm mentioning these particular things because of the questions we've had. So we've said, well, can the software tell that someone's skin tone is a bit red during part of the video? Well, the answer is no, of course, because there's no way VidChecker doesn't know that that person isn't sunburned or isn't a sunset scene, or for example, or that a night scene is a bit dark, or some audio dialogue's a bit quiet. I mean, all these are really editorial post-production decisions, and not sort of technical compliance things, and so they're not really appropriate for the auto QC. So you would typically have a person dealing with those sorts of issues there. But the important point there is to be realistic about this. So you can reduce a lot the man hours that you would otherwise use for auto QC, use for QC rather, by doing it automatically, and basically it leaves the people to do the more interesting decisions, actually, where you do require judgment. So it can sort the sort of majority good from the minority bad, and we typically say that you should aim for about a 95% pass rate if things are going to plan, should we say, with 5% to look at there. And I guess another aspect, I mean, part of that is that if you do that, the return on investment can be very short, and it saves having people looking at media. I mean, one thing that we have seen, if you're just doing QC, and you have to do the human QC on some things, like looking for language nudity, but you only do it on material that's known good otherwise. So you don't do all the technical checks, then you do the sort of nudity and language checks or whatever it might be, and then you re-edit it, and then you have to do all the technical checks again manually. You really don't want to do that manually. It's a sort of waste of manual time there. So doing it automatically can be a very big time saver, and certainly the automatic correction can be a very big time saver as well on the common errors on the audio and video levels in particular. So I've rattled through that fairly fast there. Questions?
Hey Thomas, it's Matt again. There were a couple of questions that came through. Some of them I am going to take offline, but just one question I'm going to throw out there. Can it check the quality of ASI or RF? For example, COFDM.
No, I mean, you see, ASI is a live stream, and RF, I mean, this is just looking at data on a file, files on a disk, essentially. And clearly ASI is a live stream, so it's not a file on disk. If you take an ASI stream and write it to a disk, it will check that file on a disk, but it's not doing live checking. It's checking files in particular.
Excellent. Okay, now there were just a couple more questions which I will take offline. They're fairly specific. So yeah, we have logged all those questions, so we will follow that up with you either today, tomorrow, or by the end of the week at the very latest. So I think that's it. Thank you very much, Thomas. What I'm going to do is just grab control back of the screen for one final slide.
The trial version, yeah.
Yeah, so just bear with us a second. So yeah, if you'd like to evaluate the software, please make contact with Digistore so we can arrange a 14-day license for you. And something else I'd like to flag is there's going to be a price adjustment in the new year, as there's been a lot of really cool new features and functionality added to the product, and there hasn't been a price adjustment for some time. So if you get in before the end of the year, you'll be saving approximately 5 to 10% off these new prices. Once again, the questions have been logged, so we will follow up with you by the end of the week. I'll leave my contact details on the slide here. Once again, thank you very much, Thomas, from the UK. It's very late over there, and thanks to all attendees as well for taking the time to sit with us.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Right. Thanks.